want to take a minute to talk about crappie jig heads specifically. I've talked hair, I've talked plastics, we've talked setups, a number of things, but a lot of questions lately have come in on what jig head are you using? And I've name dropped a handful over the last couple of weeks, but I wanted to get down and dirty a little more on the types of jig heads I'm favoring. There's really three, I guess, styles, and there's so many variations. And before I kick off this little video, confidence is king. If you have a jig head that you love to fish and it works for you, my best advice, continue to fish it. So for me, this is kind of my go-to. I always want to have the smallest profile, but the amount of weight I want to feel everything that's going on. So I say that because oftentimes we start fishing, especially when the water temps are in the upper 40s, low 50s, with pretty big stuff. There is a time and a place for that. In the coming weeks, when these fish get super aggressive, it's amazing what they'll hit, right? But for most of my spring fishing, I turn to a tungsten offering for a lot of it because I can fish a smaller presentation, but have the weight that I need to feel the bite. For example, you've heard me talk about the drop TG a lot from Clam Outdoors. That's a 1/32 ounce jig. It doesn't look that big, but it's a 1/32 ounce jig, so I can feel this, I can pitch it, I have control. It also comes in a 1/16, a little larger hook than the 1/16. For me, this 1/32 ounce drop TG seems to work the best for just about every plastic application, unless I'm uber micro finesse. So you're talking about your typical crappie tubes, your plastic minnow baits like a Sassy Stingum, your 2-inch twister tails, right? Even a live minnow, this works exceptionally well. And that's just your standard ball head jig, nothing fancy, wire plastics keeper, real strong mustad hook, and away we go. I'll fish this a ton. I'll fish it today. I'll fish it throughout the summer. My kids tie hair on it. Most of these you see tied up with hair are using this exact jig. They come in a 4-pack, and I'll use them for plastics, or use them for hair. So that's a big one. That's a do-everything jig. I also like to use lead oftentimes if I need to get down and dirty with, let's say, a slower fall, more negative to neutral fish. And when that's the situation, I turn to that Moon Eye jig from VMC. I love this jig. It's a little thinner profile and, you know, falls a little slower. My kids, you might see some down here, can't tell probably on camera, but they tie hair on this as well. So it's a smaller, little smaller hook. So if I want to use a smaller plastic, a smaller offering, a smaller twister tail, whatever it might be, and a little slower fall, I'll turn to this Moon Eye jig. I like this one a lot. It's a good hook. I've caught a pile of fish on this. It works exceptionally well. And last but not least, I have some tied on here, is I will switch to like a Sassy Stingum. This is actually, there's hair on it, but they come without the hair. By Mr. Twister, and they actually make a 1/24 ounce, which is kind of a cool size. So if you don't want to quite use the 1/32, you need to be a little more oomph. They have a 1/24 ounce, a little longer shank hook, great for plastic. So if I'm pitching, let's say, into more cover, weeds, and I want a slower fall even, I will switch to that jig. And it's got that Barbarian sickle hook, really good, comes in all the right colors you need, and it works exceptionally well. The only one I'm probably leaving out, which honestly at this point in the season I'm kind of past, is your ice fishing jig, your smaller profile tungsten jig, whatever. We talked about this a couple weeks ago. I'm kind of past that. The stuff I'm showing you now is really what I'm using at this point. I'm probably going to live with that 1/32 ounce drop TG, whether I'm pitching, whether I'm fishing it under a float. And the only time I'd go to that 1/16 is if we get some heavy wind and I'm fishing it a little deeper. And I feel like at that point I'm targeting fish that are really feeding and I'm covering water more effectively. But when it comes to jigs for crappies, oftentimes I think, let's call it what it is, we overthink it. You know, a lot of times you want to put that bait, right profile, right size, not too big and gaudy, right profile, right size, which is generally that 1.5 to 2.5 inch profile if you want a general rule of thumb, and you want to present it to where the fish are. Toughest part of the equation when it comes to crappie fishing is being where the fish are. And if they're biting, you'll know it. So pay attention to electronics. If the fish aren't biting and you're seeing them, move. Crappies are schooling. They're starting to feed really well right now. Water temps are into the mid 50s. It's go time. So get to where the fish are and don't waste time if you're not seeing anything on your electronics. That's probably the biggest rule of thumb. And pay attention to your temperature. Temperature in the spring is a lot of the importance. Otherwise, get out there, have some fun, catch some fish. It's go time. These crappies are not quite spawning yet. They're not quite doing that, but it's going to happen here in the coming weeks. If you look at the forecast next week, I think I actually saw some 70s. I'm in a hoodie and a vest this morning. It's in the 40s outside here to start the day, but things will warm up nicely. Get out there, have some fun, catch some fish, set some hooks for me.